Welcome. Today we're undertaking a very careful examination of a case that, for many, defines the long and often painful road to justice in the UK. We're looking at the 1986 Babes in the Wood murders in Brighton.
It's a case that is just extraordinary in its scope and its timeline. The source materials we're looking at really highlight how the murders of 9-year-old friends Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway triggered the largest and, well, the longest-running inquiry in the history of Sussex police.
30 years. It's almost unbelievable.
Over 30 years. And that duration itself tells a story about the systemic failures and the scientific breakthroughs that had to happen along the way.
And that's really our focus today, isn't it? We want to unpack that timeline from the documents. We need to understand how a really catastrophic acquittal in 1987 was eventually, decades later, overturned.
Exactly. It's a story about changes in law, but even more so about the incredible evolution of forensic science.
Before we go any further, it's so important to state that this is an incredibly sensitive topic. We're committed to an impartial reporting of the facts from the sources.
Absolutely. Our thoughts are with the families of Nicola and Karen. The resilience they showed over decades of just unimaginable pain and uncertainty is something that comes through so strongly in all the records of this case.
So let's go back to the beginning. October 1986, Brighton. We have two 9-year-old girls, Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway. Best friends.
Yes, they lived very close to each other on the Mole Sukum estate, which is in the north of the city. The reports from Thursday, October 9th, paint a picture of a very normal afternoon.
They came home from school.
They did, around 3:30 p.m. And then later, at about 5 o'clock, Nicola's mother, Susan Fellows, she saw them playing outside. They were with their roller skates, a detail that many people remembered.
And that was the last time a family member saw either of them alive.
That's right. They were just, being children. But they made a choice that evening that tragically led them into incredible danger.
They were seen later on, weren't they? Near some shops.
They were. Near a parade of shops on Lewis Road. And a 14-year-old who knew them actually saw them there and told them, you should probably head home. It's getting dark. Your parents will be worried.
But they didn't.
No. The accounts say Nicola turned to Karen and said something like, "Come on, let's go over to the park." And this was Wild Park, a place their parents had specifically told them they were not allowed to go.
And that time, the time they were last seen, that becomes incredibly important later on.
It becomes the single most critical and destructive point of the entire first trial. They were last sighted near an old police box on Lewis Road at around 6:30 p.m. That exact time, 6:30 p.m., it just hangs over everything that follows.
Because at that exact moment, the killer was nearby.
Right there. The man who would eventually be convicted, Russell Bishop, was seen near that same police box at around 6:30, and witnesses remembered him wearing a light blue top.
Tell us a bit about Bishop. He wasn't a stranger to the area.
No, not at all. He was a local man, 20 years old, a roofer by trade. And the investigation files show his connection to the families was, well, it was already quite tense.
How so?
Earlier on that exact same day, the day the girls disappeared, Bishop had gone to the Fellows' house. He was trying to see a lodger who was staying there.
And Nicola's mother saw him.
She did. Susan Fellows told him to go away. The reports state she had very strong negative feelings about Bishop and his teenage girlfriend. So there's this chilling context there, this hostile interaction just hours before the girls vanished. The killer wasn't a stranger lurking in the woods. He was known to the family.
And so, as evening turned to night, the girls didn't come home. Their bedtime was 8 p.m.
And when they weren't back, Karen Hadaway's mother, knowing they might have gone to Wild Park, she became frantic. She made that first 999 call.
Which launched this huge search effort.
Immediate and massive.
Yeah.
You had hundreds of police officers, but also local residents, neighbors. Everyone came out. They even had a police helicopter with a thermal camera scouring the park through the night.
But the search ended in tragedy the next day.
Yes. On the afternoon of Friday, October 10th, two of the searchers, local men named Kevin Rowland and Matthew Marchant, they found the girls' bodies. Hidden together in a sort of makeshift den deep inside the park. And the post-mortem would later confirm the very worst. Both girls had been sexually assaulted and strangled.
It's unthinkable. The impact on that community must have been immense.
It shattered it. And it kicked off an investigation that, as we said, would go on for more than 3 decades.
And this is where Russell Bishop's behavior becomes so deeply cynical. he doesn't vanish. He puts himself right at the center of the search.
It's one of the most startling aspects of the case. He's right there. He's incredibly visible. The police records note that when the bodies were found, Bishop was one of the first people on the scene.
He ran towards them.
He ran towards the scene with a police constable. But what's interesting is the officer later recalled that Bishop kept his distance. He never actually got close enough to see the victims properly. It's as if he was staging his reaction for everyone else.
And then there's the story about his dog. It's such a bizarre and calculated lie.
It's completely audacious. He manages to join the official search party by claiming his little terrier, a dog named Misty, wasn't just a pet.
He said it was a trained tracker dog.
A highly trained tracker dog, yes. He even claimed it was insured for some huge amount. I think it was 17,000 pounds. It just speaks volumes about his personality. This pathological need to lie, to manipulate, to insert himself into this traumatic event to seem important.
So that pathological lying, it obviously continued when the police started questioning him about where he was on the night of the murders.
Oh, absolutely. His alibi was a complete mess. It was a maze of contradictions that immediately flagged him as being deceptive.
What were the different versions?
Well, first, he told him he'd gone to the Mulsicum area to steal a car from the university campus. Then, when they pressed him, the story changed. He said he went out to buy a newspaper, but, he didn't have any money.
So he just kept changing it.
Constantly. The next version was that he was supposed to meet his girlfriend, but he didn't show up because he had stopped to buy some cannabis and then just went straight home. The stories were so tangled, they just screamed deceit.
But the thing that really sealed their suspicions wasn't just the lies themselves, but how he tried to get ahead of the evidence.
Precisely. This is where you see his cunning. He specifically tailored his story to explain away any forensic evidence they might find.
What did he say?
He claimed that after he found the girls in the woods, he checked for a pulse. He said he felt their necks to see if they were alive.
A preemptive explanation.
A calculated, deliberate lie to explain why his skin cells, his fingerprints, his DNA might be found on their bodies. He was already thinking about his forensic defense. It's just incredibly cold.
So, despite all this, and he was arrested on October 31st, charged in December. The first trial a year later was a complete disaster for the prosecution.
A catastrophic failure. In December 1987, at Lewis Crown Court, a jury acquitted him of both rape and murder. And they did it astonishingly quickly.
How long did they deliberate?
Just 2 hours. The speed of that acquittal just tells you how completely the case had collapsed. And to make it even worse, Bishop then reportedly sold his story to a newspaper for, I think, about 15,000 pounds, painting himself as the victim.
Just extraordinary. So let's break down that failure. The documents point to a whole catalog of errors, but the biggest one seems to be the time of death.
The time of death was the fatal flaw in the 1987 case. The forensic team, and this includes the pathologist, they failed to do something incredibly basic.
Which was?
They didn't record the temperatures of the girls' bodies when they were found. In 1986, without the advanced DNA technology we have today, estimating time of death relied very heavily on things like rigor mortis and, crucially, the rate at which a body cools.
And without that initial temperature reading,
you can't make an accurate calculation. The prosecution was left with just a wide estimate. They could only say that the time of death was somewhere between 5:15 p.m. and 6:30 p.m.
And that 6:30 p.m. figure, that was the same time that witnesses claimed to have seen the girls still alive.
Exactly. It gave Bishop's defense a massive, massive opening. It created a direct contradiction.
How did the judge handle that scientific uncertainty? Because his direction to the jury was critical.
It was. The judge, Mr. Justice Scheinman, essentially tied the prosecution's hands. He directed the jury that they had to acquit Bishop unless they were, and I'm quoting from the records here, sure first that the girls were dead by 6:30 p.m.
A standard they could never meet.
They couldn't. Not with scientific certainty. Not with witnesses saying they saw the girls alive at that exact time. That one missing temperature reading basically destroyed the case.
And this lack of rigor, it seems to have extended to other physical evidence at the scene, too.
It did. The cause of death was strangulation. Yet the investigators took no measurements of the hand marks on the girls' necks. No fingerprints were lifted from that area. It's just a startling oversight.
And there was blood evidence that was just ignored.
That's right. The forensic teams found blood on Karen Hadaway's underwear, but it was never analyzed. We don't know if it was because they assumed it was the victim's own, or if the technology at the time was too limited for such a small sample, but it was another huge missed opportunity.
Which brings us to probably the most infamous piece of evidence from that first trial. The blue Pinto sweatshirt.
Ah, the sweatshirt. It really became a symbol of the entire failed investigation. It was found discarded near a railway line, which was on Bishop's Road away from the park. The police were convinced he'd thrown it away after the attack.
So they had the sweatshirt, but they mishandled it.
Terribly. The issue wasn't finding it, it was what they did with it afterwards. The chain of custody, the preservation of the evidence, it was all done so poorly.
And the defense jumped on that.
Of course. His legal team argued that it could have been contaminated, or even that it was planted by the police. They created enough reasonable doubt around this key piece of physical evidence that the jury couldn't rely on it.
And to make matters 1,000 times worse, the prosecution's star witness completely fell apart on the stand.
Bishop's girlfriend, Jennifer Johnson, her testimony was meant to be the nail in his coffin. She was supposed to connect him to that sweatshirt and confirm he was a liar.
But she did the complete opposite.
She committed perjury. She had given an initial statement to the police confirming that Bishop owned that exact blue Pinto sweatshirt. But in court, she changed the story completely. She told the jury she had never seen it before in her life.
Which is bad enough, but she went even further, didn't she? She accused the police of fabricating her statement.
She did. She alleged that the police had made the whole thing up and had forged her initials on the document. It was absolutely devastating for the prosecution.
It must have destroyed their credibility in the eyes of the jury.
Completely. It played right into the defense's narrative that the police were so desperate to convict Bishop that they were manufacturing evidence. Her lie, combined with the shaky time of death and the poorly handled sweatshirt, it created the perfect storm for an acquittal.
A total institutional disaster. And a dangerous predator was allowed to walk free.
Which is the absolute tragedy here.
Yeah.
Because Bishop wasn't rehabilitated by his close call with the law. He didn't change his ways.
No. Within just 3 years, he attacked again.
Yes, the records are very clear on this. In February 1990, he kidnapped, molested, and attempted to murder another young girl, a 7-year-old named Rachel Watts, in the White Hawk area of Brighton.
The similarities to the 1986 murders are chilling.
It was almost a carbon copy. A child lured away and violently attacked. His conviction for that crime in December 1990 confirmed what the police had suspected all along. He was a violent, predatory pedophile.
And that conviction finally put him in prison for life.
He received a life sentence, yes, with a minimum recommended term of 14 years. So he was behind bars. But for the families of Nicola and Karen, he was still legally untouchable for their murders.
And that's because of the double jeopardy rule. Let's unpack that a little.
Right. So under English common law at the time, there was this ancient principle of double jeopardy. It basically meant that once you'd been found not guilty of a crime, you could never be tried for that same crime again, no matter what new evidence emerged.
It was designed to protect people from being repeatedly harassed by the state.
Exactly. But in a case like this, it had the opposite effect. It protected a guilty man.
The police did try to reopen the case, though, even with that rule in place in 2002.
They did. There was a comprehensive review. They tried to apply the DNA profiling techniques that were emerging at the time to the original evidence. But the technology just wasn't quite there yet. The samples were too small or too degraded, so the investigation stalled again.
More waiting for the families.
Agonizing waiting. Until finally, there was a monumental change in the law itself.
The Criminal Justice Act of 2003.
That's the one. It came into force in 2005, and it was a landmark piece of legislation. It abolished the 800-year-old double jeopardy rule for a list of very serious offenses, including murder.
But it came with a very important condition.
A very high bar. It said you could only have a second trial if there was substantial and compelling new evidence. You couldn't just retry the same old case.
And that word compelling is key, because even with this new law, Bishop wasn't immediately put back on trial, was he?
No, absolutely not. The system is rightly cautious about overturning an acquittal. In 2006, there was a bit of a breakthrough when new forensic tests reportedly linked Bishop to the Pinto sweatshirt. There was hope.
But it wasn't enough.
It wasn't. The High Court reviewed all the evidence, and they decided it still wasn't sufficient to order a retrial. They acknowledged there was new information, but it didn't meet that very high threshold of being compelling.
I can't imagine the disappointment for the families. To have that hope and then have it taken away again.
It's just awful. And it took another 5 years, until 2011, before the real momentum started to build again. That's when Sussex police launched a full, new, cold case reinvestigation.
And this time, they brought in the heavy hitters, forensically speaking.
They did. They engaged Eurofin's Forensic Services. Now, these are the same experts who had played a huge part in finally getting justice for Stephen Lawrence. They were renowned for their work on cold cases.
So they were given the same evidence from 1986 that had failed everyone before?
The exact same evidence. Tiny samples, decades old. The scientists began re-examining everything, especially the adhesive tape samples, the tapings that had been used to lift microscopic evidence from the victim's skin and clothing.
And this is where the science had finally caught up.
This is where everything changed. The key breakthrough came in 2014. Using modern DNA techniques, specifically what's called low copy number or LCN profiling, which can get a result from just a few cells, they re-examined those tapings.
And they found something.
They found flakes of skin. And when they got a DNA profile from those flakes and ran it through the national database, they got a direct match.
To Russell Bishop.
To Russell Bishop.
Yeah.
And the statistical weight of that match was it was astronomical.
What were the odds?
The probability was 1 billion to 1. The scientist's report stated that the DNA profile was 1 billion times more likely if Bishop's DNA was present than if it was absent. It was the irrefutable, compelling new evidence they had needed for so long.
1 billion to 1. There's no arguing with that. Was there any other DNA evidence?
Yes. A separate taping taken from Karen Hadaway's left forearm also came back with Bishop's DNA. So it wasn't just a random transfer. It placed him in direct physical contact with her.
So that was it. That was the key that unlocked the whole case.
It was. The legal process moved very quickly after that. In May 2016, Bishop was arrested again for the 1986 murders. And in December 2017, the Court of Appeal formally quashed his original acquittal and ordered a new trial.
So 32 years after he first walked free, he was back in the dock.
Facing justice again. The 2018 trial was led by a senior barrister, a QC named Brian Altman. And he had to present this case almost like a piece of history.
And his strategy was built on 3 pillars, as I understand it.
That's right. First, the DNA.
Yeah.
The 1 billion to 1 match. That was the foundation. Second, they were allowed to introduce Bishop's 1990 conviction for attacking Rachel Watts to show the jury his clear pattern of behavior.
And third, they had to tackle that old problem of the timeline.
They did. They completely dismantled the original 6:30 p.m. argument. They used modern forensic modeling to show that the murders could have happened later in the evening, giving Bishop a much wider window of opportunity. It neutralized the old defense.
I love how the prosecution described the original evidence. The term they used was time capsule.
It's such a powerful image, isn't it? Altman argued that even though the 1980s technology was limited, the original crime scene examiners had collected and preserved those tiny taping samples so meticulously that they had essentially created a time capsule.
They'd sealed the evidence of the crime, waiting for technology to catch up and unlock it.
Exactly. The diligence of those original officers in that one specific task ultimately redeemed the other failures of the first investigation.
So with all this new scientific evidence, what was Bishop's defense this time?
It was desperate and quite cynical. He maintained his innocence, of course, and he tried to deflect blame by pointing the finger at Nicola Fellow's father, Barry.
Who had been wrongfully arrested himself years earlier.
Yes, in a completely separate investigation in 2009. He was fully cleared, but Bishop tried to exploit that painful history to create doubt in the jury's mind. It was a very nasty tactic.
It didn't work.
No. After a 9-week trial, the jury deliberated for just 2.5 hours.
So almost as quick as the first jury, but with the opposite result.
Precisely. They returned a unanimous guilty verdict on December 10th, 2018. Justice, finally.
And the sentence.
2 life sentences, with a minimum term of 36 years. The system had, at long last, corrected itself.
But the story doesn't quite end there. There was still the issue of the perjury that allowed him to get away with it in the first place.
Jennifer Johnson. Her lie had enabled all of this. It allowed Bishop to attack another child and force the families to wait for decades.
And she was eventually held accountable.
She was. In May 2021, she was finally found guilty of perjury and perverting the course of justice. She admitted she had deliberately lied about the sweatshirt back in 1987.
What was the judge's view on her crime after all that time?
The judge, Mr. Justice Frazier, was scathing. He told her that her crimes were at the most serious end of the scale, and that her lie had a catastrophic effect. He sentenced her to 6 years in prison.
A strong message.
A very strong message about the sanctity of giving evidence in court, and a real validation for the families who knew she had been lying all along.
And as for Bishop himself, he didn't serve that 36-year minimum term.
No, he didn't. He died in prison from cancer in January 2022. He was 55 years old.
And finally, there was an institutional reckoning of sorts. An apology.
Yes. In April 2024, Sussex police issued a formal apology to the families. They acknowledged the failings of the initial investigation in 1986, and also, very importantly, they apologized for the wrongful arrest of Barry Fellows in 2009. It was a necessary, final piece of closure.
So the case is closed, justice served. But the source materials raise one last, deeply unsettling question, an unresolved shadow that hangs over this whole story.
The case of Margaret Frame. It suggests Bishop's predatory behavior may have started long before 1986.
Tell us about that case. It was in 1978, almost 8 years to the day before the girls were murdered.
The similarities are just striking. Margaret Frame was a 34-year-old mother. She was raped and murdered in Stanmer Park on a cold October night. Stanmer Park is less than half a mile from Wild Park.
The same location, the same time of year.
And the brutality of the crime was extreme. She was attacked, stabbed through the heart, then the killer returned later, stripped her body, dragged it 500 yards, and buried it in a shallow grave.
That suggests a degree of coldness and calculation that is very familiar.
It does. But the most direct and disturbing link came out during Bishop's 2018 trial.
What was that?
Bishop himself, while on the stand, claimed that his own father had been arrested for the Margaret Frame murder back in 1978. He was never charged, but Bishop brought it up to suggest the police had a vendetta against his family.
So whether that's true or not, it puts the Bishop family right in the middle of that 1978 investigation.
Directly in the orbit of it.
Yeah.
And the geographical detail is chilling. The spot where Margaret Frame's body was found was only 500 meters from where Russell Bishop and his father were living at the time.
And police always suspected the killer was a local?
Someone with intimate knowledge of the parks. The theory that the killer moved her body after watching the police search is certainly consistent with the kind of manipulative game plan we saw from Russell Bishop in 1986.
But the Margaret Frame case remains officially unsolved.
It does. It's a profound and chilling question that hangs in the air. Was Bishop involved? Was he influenced by it? We may never know for sure.
When you look back at all the material, two things really stand out. First, just the incredible journey of forensic science, from failing to take a body temperature to a 1,000,000-to-1 DNA match.
It's a perfect illustration of that evolution, but it's also a testament to the need for legal reform. Without the change to the double jeopardy law in 2005, all that science would have meant nothing. The science provided the proof, but the law provided the path to justice.
And we also have to credit the meticulous work of those original evidence collectors in 1986. The fact that those tiny tapings survived to be analyzed 30 years later is remarkable.
It's the ultimate lesson for any cold case investigation. Never discard anything, preserve everything, because the technology of the future might be able to read what you can't see today.
The story of Russell Bishop is a terrifying confirmation of how an offender can hide in plain sight, enabled by early mistakes. But as we finish this examination, it's that unresolved question of Margaret Frame that really lingers.
It does. Given the proximity, the timing, and Bishop's own family connection to that case, it remains this dark, unanswered question sitting in the shadow of the justice that was finally won for Nicola and Karen.
Thank you for walking through this difficult and complex material with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.